toward the one, the perfection of love, harmony and beauty, the only being, united with all the illuminated souls who form the embodiment of the Master, the Spirit of guidance. Greetings and salutations, dear friends around the world. We want to use this time to share with you the extraordinary process and experience that our project manager, Malik, Braun, and myself had together in going from Murshid Sam's Dargah the way it was to the compelling guidance to build a Dargah for Murshid, and then all the many steps. And so we hope through this video that we can give you a glimpse of this process that we had the good fortune to be part of and to offer our love and our energy to make happen. So we're going to do it a lot through pictures and take you through the stages of what arose through the visual. So let me share the screen here. And this is Murshid Sam's Dargah, the way it appeared somewheres around the late 70s, early 80s. Murshid Sam's Dargah, his gravesite, which used to be called Maqbara, which is also not an incorrect name, but Maqbara means a grave site. It was a name that Sufi Barkat Ali had provided us with. Just simply means grave site, but the grave site of a Sufi master, of a Sufi saint, in the tradition is often called a Dargah, the gateway to the opening of the heart. And so at a certain point, I suggested that we gently change the name from Maqbara to Dargah, not with the sense that anything was right or wrong, but more appropriate. So this is a picture of Murshid Sam's Dargah from that period. It's on Lama Mountain. When he passed away, we didn't really know what his wishes were in a written way, but he had said a few times in passing, said, if I die, you could either bury me in Pakistan or at Lama Foundation. And he was buried in the middle of the winter. You know, he died January 15th. The ground was frozen. This spot was selected. And it turns out actually it was on Forest Service land. And so many years later, Lama Foundation had to do a land swap with the Forest Service. So as you can see in the photo, there's a beautiful ponderosa pine forest creating so much shade all day. We wanted to show you a few views. Here we are, you know, this sense of the child feeling so free to be on the grave, and our dear friend Murshid Wali Ali, myself. This is probably, I would think this is in the 1990s, before the fire. Here's the beautiful sign that Bob Johnson carved for us. This was a hadith that Murshid Sam identified with. On that day, the sun shall rise in the west, and all men seeing will believe. Hadith means one of the sayings of Prophet Muhammad. Here it is in the snow. Up on the left is our dear brother Ahad, in the middle Uwais, some of the people you might know.
These are all residents of Lama.
Yeah. Here's the post the fire. So there was a very powerful fire, I think in 1996, which burned most of the ponderosa pine on the hill, and then also some of the structures, but the main Lama structures remained, and somehow the icon of the central dome and remained, and it allowed Lama to have a rebirth, so to say. And it was in around 2007 that I started having this strong guidance from, for me, what I would say from Murshid, but to build a proper Dargah there. And Lama asked me to do a retreat. They said, well, you should come. I had done many retreats there, but again, I did a solitary retreat up at what was called the Maqbara hut, now called the Dargah hut, which is right by the grave. And my habit is to get up early in the morning. I would go to this site early in the morning, and I'd start meditating and doing practice. But by 9 a.m., the sun was so powerful I could no longer sit by the grave. And that somehow gave me a stronger impulse to create something where people could be comfortable and stay there all day. And then in response to that, our dear Murshida Asha built these 2 places for sun protection. They later became known as bus stops, but they were there at the Dargah. There was a beautiful rock wall built behind it, which also served as a place where people could sit who couldn't sit on the floor. This was the sign, that same sign we looked at earlier. You could see what it looked like. Somehow it didn't burn in the fire. It got a little bit toasted, but it still remained. Because that place where the Dargah, the grave mound was small. Over the years, from the late 70s on, we built a dance circle just slightly below the Dargah. And here we are. You can see in the background is the refurbished Dargah hut, meditation hut, where people do a retreat. This is again after 1996, after the fire. And here is a similar experience I wanted to share with you, that part of the inspiration that came. So I visited Hazrat Inayat Khan's Dargah in India in 1976. And this is what it was like. It was open to the sky. And the same impulse then in 1976 was to go and do a week-long retreat there all day, to sit there all day, but there was nowheres to have shade. It was open to the sky. And then years later, Murshid Karim Baksh Vitavain and many other people with him built this beautiful structure around that same small Dargah and created shade and beauty. And so now you can go there and you can meditate 24 hours a day and have a sense of protection from the elements. And that also moved me a lot. I looked inside and I went to one of our artists, Murshid Kabir Kits, and said, Kabir, this is kind of what I'm seeing. And this was one of the first drawings that came. Then we started having, so I went in 2007, I approached Lama and said, I'd love to do this project. And we started having a Lama council that we would meet with, and the people from our side who were helping me with the concept of the project. This is a particular meeting at Fatima Pamela Rigsby's home in Taos.
That actually occurred in 2014.
Yeah, so this is much later, and our architect is there. If you go fourth from the left, it's Eric Dowd, the architect, Sarah Morgan, to the third from the left. Some of you know Surya, second from the right, and Sadiq. So let's go on from here, but this gives you a sense. We had many, many meetings like this. And then, so Lama said, the same man who carved this sign, Bob Johnson, had a son-in-law who was an architect, who had a love for Lama and a love for sacred architecture. And they said, why don't you see if he could be a good architect for you? And his name was Eric Dowd. And not only was good, he was spectacular. And so this is a later drawing of the idea of the Dargah before we started building.
Didn't he travel with you to India also for inspiration?
So I told him about my wishes that I would like the dome to be in resonance with Lama architecture, so that there would be a sense of honoring Lama architecture, that the building would be 8-sided to honor the same sense of some of the sacred buildings at Lama Foundation. I wanted the architecture to reflect some of the sacred architecture from Mother India, where there are so many beautiful dargahs in our Chistiya Sufi tradition. And then I wanted part of the architecture to honor the Native American presence in the Southwest and their architecture. And so the dome is built according to resonance with the Lama dome. The pillars, the floor, we'll see some more of that in resonance with the dargahs, the Sufi dargahs in India, and these rock walls to be in resonance with Native American architecture, probably from the around 1100 AD. So here's just to get a sense of some of the drawings that would come. The spiral pillars and the floor, I would say the spiral pillars echo the spiral pillars at the tomb of the great Sufi master Selim Chishti in Fatehpur Sikri, near the court of Emperor Akbar. And Murshid Sam felt especially close to him. He said he received much of the inspiration for the dances of universal peace there. Here was a early concept of what the floor would look like, which really came from the floor at Fatehpur Sikri. You know, there's a big courtyard there, and that's what this floor Islamic geometry came from. And if you have been to the Dargah, you see that we've changed it a little, because we kept these stars as darker pink or ruddy color, but we did the same with the 5-pointed stars that are here, and so it creates more contrast. So this was after we had signed the contract with Lama to go ahead. When was that? In the spring of?
Yeah, that was March 20th, 2015, the spring equinox.
Yeah. So now we're having a summer retreat at Lama, and this is the last day of our retreat, and it's the first day. So it was probably June, I think, June of that same year.
August 23rd, actually.
Really?
Yeah, August 23rd, 2015.
Okay. So you can see here's Murshid Darvish, and here's Gayan, and our dear Waduda. Anyway, so many people that you know many of these people. Malik, Azim, who was the head of our tech committee at the time for the board of trustees. Here's Bobby, Rebecca. So, and now I'm going to let our dear Malik take over. Oh, I should go back here for a moment. So I had these inner urgings to do this, and Malik, who's here with us today, who has tremendous experience in the building trades, in management trade, building inspector, and so on, came to me and said, "Do you need a project manager?" and you know, very naively, I said, "Oh, I hadn't thought of that. That'd be great. You know, he said, well, I'd like to volunteer. So that turned into living at Lama for years and years and years, managing this project with heart and soul. So now let me pass it on to our extraordinary project manager.
Yeah, so this first photo here is around September 9th, but just think about it. We signed the contract on March 20th, had the blessing ceremony in August 23rd, and we had mobilized, had our first contractors involved. We had chosen to have a general contractor because we wanted to do this with a building permit, and so it seemed best that we have a contractor for that purpose, which turned out to be a very wise decision, as I'll comment later on, for many reasons. But we received the building permit, and September 3rd, or early September, we're breaking ground. And on the left is Ravi Babcock, who was a project assistant and worked on almost every phase, if not every phase, of the project all the way through to the completion, the very last day, and is a current responsible party for maintaining, overseeing, and protecting the Dargah as he lives on the mountain, just a few miles down the mountain. And to his right is Jai Cross, who was Lama's representative, environmental and remediation advisor and representative. And this is starting up the hill, starting the new road after we had rebuilt much of the road at considerable time and expense between Lama Central and up the hill to where we began the new road. And this is just a couple days after we had complete building the new road. It's about 700 feet long. And up at the top, it takes a left turn at that ridge and line and goes up another 200 feet. In the background, you'll see often, as we see right now, the rebuilt retreat hut. So we can go on from here to the next slide. And this is our very first excavation. A couple things to point out here. You'll notice the red string lines on the bottom. That's because, as Shabda mentioned, Murshid was buried on Forest Service land. Lama, after long years of negotiation, was able to purchase about a 1 acre parcel that connects with their property. And the corner of that site is just to the lower right of this picture, which turned out to have quite a few implications on building. The string lines are put up there so we don't cross over into Forest Service land. And the other thing to notice here is that the two workmen who are looking at plans are what we thought would be the center of the Dargah, and where the design principles emanate from, spiraling out of there in a Fibonacci spiral. The problem was that the actual grave was located much closer to the property line, to the west, northwest actually. And we'll see that a little clearer. It created quite a problem in the construction. And this is our very first pour. There are two foundation stem walls, and this is the very first footing that we're pouring, the outer port. And you can see Ravi in the green shirt, and just above his head now you can see the corner of the property line and how we're so close to it.
And when Malik and I talked about this and the architect, the sense was, let's build something that will be stable for 500 years. That was the kind of the aim. So the foundation, there's so much strength to this building.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit as we see some of the pictures about that strength, but we had a structural engineer besides Eric Dowd, architect, but Bill Druce and Druce Engineering provided the structural design. This is the inner foundation, which is at this time of this photo is having a steel reinforcement put inside of the foundation. And the reason for that is this particular foundation takes all of the loads from the structure that's going to be built on the top. On the outside, you can see a portion of the completed outer foundation that is the outer perimeter of the building. And as I said, it was we obtained a building permit, but because of the proximity to the Forest Service lines, the Forest Service had to give their approval, which turned out to be quite a bureaucratic process, but eventually we achieved it. And they said absolutely no building on the Forest Service property lines, And of course, we had observed that anyway, but one day at lunchtime, we were quite surprised by two Forest Service surveyors who are pictured here. And it turned out that we're perfectly accurate. That is our friend Scott McCarty, who's building the foundation. His layout was perfect, and we're on Llama land, and so they cleared us. And this is the first of many, many truckloads. By contract with Llama, our road could only be 10 feet wide. That is the new road. And these brave souls who drove these trucks up here came up, and then somehow were able to turn around as we pumped concrete up to the Dargah site. I believe in total, we did 75 yards of poured concrete from these trucks.
Now, how many truckloads is that, Malik?
Well, it would be, they had to take smaller loads because of the steep grade. So it was probably 6 yards, 6 to 7 yards per
So
concrete.
a dozen.
So at least 10, yeah, 10 to 12 truckloads. Yeah, it was quite a process. And here I want to point out a couple things. Now you can clearly see the two foundations, the outer perimeter, and then the heavily reinforced inner one that takes the loads. As I'd mentioned, one of the great things about having the contractor is he recommended a number of subcontractors who turned out to be extraordinary contributors. And this is Scott McCarty on the left with his back to actually in the middle, and a couple of workmen. He has played a part in much of the construction. But what's important here is you'll notice that there are 4 bolts on the inner foundation. You'll see them in different areas. So there'd be eight areas where the 4 bolts were placed. And the foundation and these bolts had to be extremely accurately placed, because in the background, we're having stone constructed that's going to go in place here, but also a wooden structure that goes on top of it. And all of it is being built off-site and coordinated with this foundation work. So it all has to be accurate in order to fit at a later point. So we felt best safety, best precaution would be to actually install a lightning protection system. And so there are 2 copper plates buried below columns 3 and 7 that are buried, and then go up the conductor threaded all the way up through the structure, well concealed, and eventually the 2 conductors connect with a lightning rod, which we'll see later on in this presentation. And by code and electrical code and standards, these plates had to first be buried. So this is after burying the lightning protection plates, filling in and ready for the concrete slab that goes on the top here. Again, you can see the bolts. On here, we're placing the very first of the steel columns, which again have been made off-site. They're 4-inch columns of high-strength steel, and all of the loads of the structure, including during winter snow loads, are carried down to the foundation through these 8 pipes. One thing you'll notice is that the bolts on the bottom have nuts that before the columns are placed on that. And the reason for that is we could use the nuts to adjust slightly the heights. So the top of each column is perfectly level with all the other columns. Again, we're conscious of the accuracy in each step.
Malik, didn't I understand that these columns weighed like 300 pounds each?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was a very expensive, heavy steel, and they were manufactured at a blacksmith welder shop who also played a very large part in this whole scenario, building the Dargah. Jim Stoner, and we'll see Jim later on. But so he built these according to the specifications supplied by Bill Drew's structural drawings. Just another shot of the electrical conductor, protection conductor working its way up the Dargah. And now we're prepared to pour the concrete slab, which all of the ornamental tiles, stone tiles will go on. You can see that the columns have all been leveled and grouted into place. And next we begin our pour. I don't remember how many yards this took, but it took a lot of truckloads, and we were able to do it all in one day. And you can see by the background now it's getting late fall, and we're quite lucky to get this poured before the first big storms come in. And the storm did come in.
Right when you finished, if I remember correctly, the storm.
Yeah. It was the next day or day after, and it was our sign to say, it's time to wrap it up. So traditionally, we would always have snows, usually in or often in September, but definitely an occasional snow, light snow by October 30th. Generally, there would be a real heavy snow, and that's what we're approaching here in that first construction year of 2015.
So meanwhile, I take groups on pilgrimage to India, and this particular year, I went to visit the quarry where all the stone we were going to use for the Dargah would be built, assembled, or carved, I guess is the right word. We were given the connection to a wonderful architect who had helped in the construction of Hazrat Inayat Khan's Dargah, Parag Pradhan, and he and myself, along with a few other people, traveled from Delhi past Agra, a few hours past Agra, to this stone quarry. Here's some of the workers who were polishing this stone. I remember showing this to my Tibetan guru, Taisitu Rinpoche, and I was saying, I was kind of surprised they had the women working, and he said, no, this is a wonderful thing. They have work. So that's how he saw it in India, and I really appreciated that view. And so these are the plinths, the columns behind. This was an important moment here. So here we were looking at the drawings and what they had done. And when I saw this, they had just began making the floor, and they'd made the floor too large to scale. The stones were too large. And as you can see in this version, the stars, I don't know if you can see my pointer, but the stars were also the lighter color instead of this darker color. And so I asked them to scale down. We worked with the architect there and our own architect to make the stones of a smaller size, and then to make all of the stars in the red sandstone as well. So it was a very important trip that way. And so they had to start again on the floor. This was a sad saga. I'll let Malik tell you about it.
Yeah. So as I said, we finished the construction. It was actually November 3rd in 2015, but in the background, there were two main features occurring, and that was what Shabda showed, the quarry. His photo was taken in February, so that stone was already being manufactured. But at the same time, we had ordered some white oak timber for to construct the wooden heavy timber frame for the zone and the porch overhang. And we had in the with the concept of having best materials, best workmanship, we had chosen white oak. And by chance, we had a friend who was a wood broker living in Colorado. He said that he could find the white oak for us. One problem would be that, of course, to keep on schedule, where we would be constructing in 2016 using the stone work that would be delivered, as well as the finished wood, it had to be dried. And by normal methods, that wasn't possible. But our friend Kent Mace, who had found the wood, he had found it in Minnesota, where it was cut into these blanks. And he found in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, there was a new wood drying process called radio vacuum kiln drying. And this concept was first developed in China, but the technology was being used quite a bit in Canada. And this person who had this facility in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, was one of the very first, if not the first, applications of this drying method. So you could speed up drying in just a few weeks rather than a couple of years. And so the process was that an electrical probe is put in the top of the pile, another in the bottom of the pile. It's put into that cylinder, closed. A huge vacuum is developed. Electrical charge is sent through it, and as opposed to the normal drying process that's done where the drying proceeds from the outer portion of the wood to the inner part. A radio vacuum kiln works much like a microwave. And you can see what happened. The timbers were totally destroyed. You can see actually how the moisture goes from the center to the outside of each one of these ones. But for some reason, we don't know why, it didn't work in this process. And we had $150,000 invested at this point in the purchase and the original milling and the first effort of this. So I went to Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and met with these people along with Kent Mace, and they weren't interested in paying us back $150,000. So we were pretty concerned about this point. We could be stalled for some time, but it was resolved by Kent very, 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 in a very wonderful gesture. Paid us back the $150,000 while he dealt with recovering the funds from the kiln dryer. So we were able to continue on. The issue is now, what kind of wood would we use? And Eric Dowd had recommended that we use Douglas fir. At the same time, we were looking for the appropriate timber frame contractor, which is a very specialized type of wood framing work. And we found the perfect person in Mancos, Colorado, by the name of Alan Bernholtz and his company, Wind River Timber Framers, were looked to be just the perfect partners. So we signed a contract with him, and he suggested that we use tight grain Douglas fir, which he could obtain and felt totally comfortable that it would last for, hundreds of years in this particular construction. So we signed on with Alan. He ordered the lumber, and now this too is occurring in the background as we're working on the site. And so we resumed the work in April of 2016. It was still snowy. We couldn't get any materials up the mountain, but we began by taking the stonework that had been part of the bench behind Murshid's grave mound. During that blessing ceremony, all of the participants dismantled that bench and took the stones downhill, and we decided to build a bench at the dance circle. And also we were able to carry by huge effort the 2 bus stops down the hill and make use of them by placing them at the side of the dance circle. And so this is Davy Varga, who was part of the original crew of when we cleared the brush from the roadway and had participated in much of the work throughout the construction. And so we started that, as I said, in April of 2016. The next part was completing the stairs in the entry landing. As in 2015, we were only able to do the Dargah structure itself, foundation and slab. But unfortunately, just before, or several months before, a couple months before this photo was taken, Scott McCarty, our wonderful foundation contractor, on a Sunday, May 15th, fell through the 2nd floor of his barn and suffered an incredible life-threatening injury. He was airlifted to Santa Fe Hospital, and took him, he was hospitalized for quite a period of time. And so consequently, we shut the construction site down on the Dargah. In the meantime, Davy and Ravi built the bathroom facility, storage facility, worked on the bench. And then we resumed work in August 2016. That's when this photo was taken, after Scott had recovered sufficiently. And now we're completing the final foundation portion of the Dargah, the steps and the entry landing. So by contract, we were not allowed to have any religious symbology at the Dargah site, but we decided to use the occasion of pouring these steps to work around that. So we had vaults made in each step. So there are 7 steps, there are 7 vaults. And within each one of those vaults, there's a symbology of the 7 religions, which we'll see here. So Native American, Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Buddhism. I think that's all of them. So they're inserted, and each time you walk up the steps, you're crossing by one of these symbols. Meanwhile, in late 2016, the Indian stonework showed up in these 2 trucks. Now we had sent specific instructions to the stone provider to place the stones in such a way on pallets inside that we could retrieve them easily with what's known as a pallet dolly. So we could roll the dolly and pull them to the edge. And we were unloading at a livestock feed yard, feed supplier that allowed us to use the space and their forklift to unload. But when we opened it up, the trucks, the stone pallets had been loaded so haphazardly, we couldn't use the forklift from the feed store. We had to have one brought in from another town, and We'll go to the next slide here. So we were able to use by the a different forklift with an extended, I think it was a 20-foot extension. We were able to get most of them out, but it turned out to be extraordinarily dangerous. As you can see, some of the pallets were stacked on top of each other. And so it was a laborious 2-day process by using this specialized forklift to unload the 2 trucks. It took 2 days to do this. And because it was now fall and we couldn't arrange for anyone to help us out to haul the stone pallets up to the Llama Foundation, we rented a parcel of land at the feedlot store and put all of the stored all of the pallets. There were 70 pallets that we stored there for the winter and rented, I think, for something like 6 months to hold them there in place. Meantime, Wind River Timber Framers in their shop at Mancos, Colorado, was building the timber frame. Because of the incredible complexity of the design and the joinery, they first built the Zome out of inexpensive lumber to get their joints correct. Then they used the tight crane Douglas fir, recut and all of the joints and reassembled it to make sure that it was exactly correct and to all the correct dimensions. So here are a few examples of the complexity of the joinery.
And I think, Malik, we might say here too that the dome at Llama wasn't built on a typical Buckminster Fuller architecture, but it used what they called zonahedron mathematics. And so our architect, Eric Dowd, studied the zonahedron mathematics and then followed that here so that we would be in resonance with the Llama Dome.
Yeah, that's right. This concept was developed by a guy by the name of Steve Bear from Albuquerque, and that's what the design was of the Zome. And so Eric wanted to replicate that, which we did, and the Wind Timber Framers successfully constructed the Zome with that method. So now we're ready to begin the superstructure. The foundation is completed. The pipes are in place. The steel columns are in place, and so it's time to begin the very first part of the superstructure, which is the placing the stone columns in their intended parts. So towards late spring, we brought up the base and columns and stone capitals. We somehow were able to get this crane up there. It's a 24-ton crane. We had to cut a notch in the side of the hill so the crane could back up far enough so that it could reach the far corner of the foundation. And now our stonemasons came for this part of the process. So here we are placing the base, the first of the bases on the stone columns. Now, what's kind of interesting is that the steel columns, as I mentioned, are 4 inches in diameter. The bore through each of these pieces that fit over it is only 4 1/4 inches, and so there is no tolerance. The bore through each stone base and column has to be perfectly straight. I have no idea how they did this in India, but they were perfectly bored. Jim Stoner on the right, again, a major player in this effort, not just because he was the steel fabricator, welder, metal artist, but he's also a premier rigger, which is someone who specializes in lifting materials with cranes and so on. To the left is our head mason. Now, not only do the bases have to be level, but they have to be high enough, and that's what Bo is looking at right now, to allow for a grout and the stone tiles to fit just underneath the edge here. And then it's about at this point that Jim Stoner took a measurement of the amount of steel that was left after this first base and discovered a huge error. So we'll go to the next slide here. It turned out there was a miscommunication in the drawings. And though Jim had manufactured those columns with the right length, the capital that goes on the top wasn't accounted for. So consequently, the stone columns, which had been constructed in India to the specified length, were now 4 inches too long. So Bo and one of his assistant masons, David Kraut, who again is a major player, both being major players through the Dargah construction, volunteered to cut 4 inches off of each column. This took 2 days of incredible, tedious work. I think they did that on a weekend. So we'll go to the next slide here. So Monday, we had put the bases on. We were able to lift the freshly cut columns and place them over the pipes. So this, I think it took us actually we put the columns in 1 day, and you can see how carefully they had to be tied and rigged to be lifted in place. And turned out by cutting that notch in the hillside, the crane was able to reach the far side of the Dargah and place those columns on the far side. In fact, this is one of those on the far side. On the right, Chief Mason Bo, and on the left, Jim Stoner. And these are the capitals that weren't calculated into the original measurements that are being placed. So now we've completed the base, the columns, the capitals. The next phase is you'll notice in the front of the photo and the bottom, there are 16 steel plates there, and those are something that Jim Stoner had manufactured at his shop, and they'll be welded just above, a 1/4 inch above those capitals to act as kind of what we would call as seats to hold the wooden corbels that are going to be placed there next. So he begins that process. In the meantime, we notify the timber framers that we're ready to have them come down to place the wooden corbels.
I remember when this picture, when this picture came, and it just felt we were looking at some kind of Greek, Roman ruins, or, it was such a great moment. And to go back here too, so people can understand, these steel plates are welded so that the stone doesn't bear any weight at all. It's all held by the steel.
Yeah, the columns are all, stone columns are all freestanding, and then they're later on there's a material placed in between so you don't see the gap. But Jim Stoner, being the professional craftsman, extraordinary craftsman that he is dry fitting the steel ring beam pieces that will go up after the corbels, before the corbels are placed, to make sure that he accurately cuts each of them. And you'll see down below, Ravi's his assistant. As I mentioned, he worked on virtually every phase of this construction. But once Jim had dry fitted each of the railings, he went back to Taos, and our timber framers from Mancos, Colorado, showed up and began the next phase. The next phase involved placing these corbels that were the very first thing. The blanks were cut by Wind River in in actually late 2015, early 2016, and shipped down to Snowflake, Arizona, to our extraordinary artist and dear brother Michael Jamal Cothraid, in his assistance in carving each of these corbels. Just extraordinary workmanship. And so these corbels are the first to go on. And I asked that they be delivered in April to meet our schedule, even though I wasn't sure we'd be able to start construction then. And true to his word, Michael delivered all of the corbels in late April, so we were right on schedule.
And we had worked on the design of these together. They were meant to hearken the corbels that you would see in many of the structures of Dargahs in Mother India, creating a beautiful, inviting entryway, a very feminine and beautiful entryway. And then with the carvings, all the carvings that faced outward would use the sunburst theme, and all the ones that faced inward would hearken Murshid Sam as a horticulturist and a soil scientist and a gardener, and they had a garden theme. So you'll see here's the garden theme, and those. So this is the other side of the corbel, and they oiled them many times. There was so much loving care put into these corbels.
So here we are flying them into a place with the crane. Michael's delivery was perfect. The wood timber frame crew came down for this phase of the work. I don't think it took us more than 2 days to place it, but again, accuracy was extremely important on how they were placed. And you'll see that as we progress here, how that was obtained.
There's one thing I wanted to point out, that right after Murshid Sam passed away, I lived at a home called the Garden of Allah. And whenever the Murshid Sam's women's dance class would meet, in my memory, a crow or a raven would land on the porch outside and look in. And so for me, and it turned out for many people, they had an association of Murshid Sam with a raven or a crow. And if you look at this tree in the center of the picture and what's above it, when you would look at that little piece, it always looked like a raven or a crow was kind of looking and protecting the area. And that had been there for a long, long time. So I just wanted you all to appreciate that element.
So on May 15th, the wind timber framers showed up and did their installation work. And we'll see various phases of that.
You could see there's so many moments as the construction went on where just overwhelmed by the beauty that was coming alive.
Yeah, it was at this point when I actually, just before the corbels went on, I realized this is really, really happening. This is really happening I was going on faith for a long time, but now I knew for sure that we were building a Dargah, a beautiful Dargah. And you can see the importance of the alignment and how careful the timber framers were in aligning it. And of course, the crow up above overseeing everything. This is the wind timber framing crew, and I don't have their names in front of me at the moment, but the two on the left were timber framers. The guy in the middle is the crane operator, and then two on the right. They were extraordinary craftsmen, hard workers. And now, after the corbels are in place, the Wind River crew goes back to Mancos to complete the construction of the zone, and Jim is now putting on the steel ring beam that is the final structural piece. So the columns and the steel compression frame are concealed, are not seen when you visit the Dargah. They're concealed by the woodwork, but here you can see the nearly completed compression ring. So whereas the columns hold the, you might say, the gravity loads or the vertical loads of the weight of the Dargah, the compression ring prevents the columns from wanting to bend outward from that heavy load. So it actually holds everything together in compression. So in the meantime, we had some difficulty getting the components of the timber frame delivered to Dargah. It was on a 40-foot trailer. It had been loaded for some time, but each time it was to come to Dargah, to Lama, we had a snowstorm. Eventually, we were able to get it to the area, but the truck couldn't make it up the mountain, so we had to unload it with a forklift. By now, we had a big forklift that we'd rented and had on site, but we had to rent it about a mile down the mountain in a white space on the alongside the road, and until it was time to bring it up the mountain. We brought it up on a Saturday piece, just a few pieces at a time, taking it all day. It was then the crane operator placed the various pieces, kind of positioned them up the mountain. So the dance circle was bare, and the beginning of the reassembly of the Zome could begin. I want to point out that you'll notice that the rood is chiseled into each of these beams here. It was
Maybe we'll use the name Sufi invocation since it's more familiar to people.
Yeah, the invocation is hand carved in each of these beams. And one of Michael Jamal's assistants, Jay Fan, went to the workshop in Colorado and hand carved each one of these beams with the invocation. So now the final assembly, the third time, the Zome is being assembled on the dance circle and will be completely assembled by the crane and placed as it's completed. It's still a bit fragile, so we have it strapped, and that strap stays on it all the way until almost it's completely finished on the Zome with all of the covering.
Okay, so now this is a video. It's too long to play for us, but we're going to skip through it. But go ahead, Malik, tell a little about this. This is an amazing moment in the process.
Yeah, so it was quite spectacular, of course, and we had a crowd there. It was filmed. I think Ravi filmed it. But one of the questions was, could the crane, even though it was a 24-ton
I'm going to start the video while you're speaking so people can enjoy it. Oops, so I'm going to turn my volume down, folks. Give me a second. Okay.
Yeah, that sound is the roar of the crane engine in the background of the video. But so we'll see as it's lifted. The question was, when the boom is extended, will it have enough capacity to lift the Zome all the way onto the corbels? So there are two questions. Would the crane have the capacity, and would all of our careful work from the foundation up, the bolts, the steel columns, the placement of the corbels, will it be accurately placed so when the Zome is set on it, that'll be where it's supposed to be positioned? Yeah. So the Wind River crew now is lifting the Zome into place. The crane operator is the owner of the the crane company, Manuel Medina, is there for this particular lift. Now I have the names of the timber framers, and that's Matt Robbins and Jamie Chemez, Darby Detloff, and Paris Abernathy. They're about to see.
So since it is a long video, I'm going to skip along a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And then at some point we might hear the alarm go off, and Manuel says he can override it. It was about at this moment when the alarm went off, but he overrode it and continued.
That goes to me right here.
And now is the moment. I'm also looking to see if the corbels jiggle when the load is placed on there, or whether whether it's a strain on the corbels or not. Besides a perfect placement.
These shots look as good. I'm past my line now.
I'm basically right on my line. Let's see.
And there we have it. So it turned out that the timber frame fit perfectly, was within 1/8 of an inch on each corbel. So it was extraordinarily accurate. This is
another one of those stages where you'd think, well, let's just stop here. It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Just like this would be perfect. We don't need to go any further than this.
Some people said don't put anything on it. And so, to my amazement, that late afternoon, early evening, after we had just placed the Zohm on the corbels, this beautiful rainbow covered the Dargah. And so now the next thing is to complete the porch overhang, which took quite a long time. It had to be carefully fitted with some large pieces of timber, and we'll see that process now. And here's the beautiful work that Shabda was referring to with the sun looking outward. And it was very carefully designed for structural stability, as you can see. The final phase of the construction of the wood timber frame. Now just remember that all of this weight is now being handled by those 8 4-inch columns, steel columns. The final thing that's done by wood timber framers is a tradition to place I cut a live bough from a pine tree, and to put it on the top. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One of them is to honor all the trees that contributed themselves to the material to be used for the construction of the structure. And then a second reason is to root the structure in establishing the roots of the building for a long life. Now we begin, Scott McCarty's crew comes back, and now we begin the ceiling material. This is again when Michael Jamal Cawthray became a hero, because we thought we might want to use Douglas fir 2x6 for the ceiling material, but again, where would we find it where it was already dried? And Michael remembered in a conference call discussion that he had seen this material and stored away somewhere in the lumber yard that he often visited near his home in Snowflake. And he said it had been sitting there for several years, and he was sure it was dry enough and it looked like there was plenty. So we we said, good, we'll buy it. So we calculated the amount we needed and began installing it. That's in Evan McCarty. And you can see the detail of this beautiful wood on the outside. We miscalculated. I think I think Michael made 3 trips. We ended up buying virtually every stick and using every bit, even some scrap, to cover the ceiling. Well, this is the final phase of installing the ceiling material. You notice we leave the strap on for stability, and the real stability is by an additional application of 1/2-inch plywood that was the screws were placed at exact measurements and distance to form what we call a structural diaphragm. As that went on, we pulled that strap off. And this is the completed ceiling. The cord, that's not a cord dangling, that's the electrical conductor for the lightning rod, which will be cut and placed to the right, cut to the right length and placed when we put the skylight on, which is the next order of business. Actually, we start the copper roofing next.
Malik, I think it's worth mentioning here that cell phones work at the Dargah, and during the whole construction process, probably every single day, Malik and I spoke on the phone, and we made lots of decisions along the way, and those included the decisions of which angles to place the Douglas fir TNG, like what would be the most beautiful pattern when you were looking at it from below. But we were in constant contact, making decisions together.
This is Scott McCarty's and his crew. It was hard to get a close-up of them. They were always on the move. And on the left is Daniel Hammer, then Scott, actually his son Evan, then Scott, and then Rafael Hernandez. So they did all the foundation work, and they did all of the ceiling and structural diaphragm work. While they were doing that, we brought in the remainder of our stone shipment and got it up somehow to the dance circle. The person who'd helped us haul the columns up refused to cooperate anymore. He didn't want his truck on that road. So we had to figure out how to get it up there. We got it up on with smaller trucks, 1 or 2 pallets at a time, but assemble it because now that the ceiling material is completed on the Dargah, it means that we can have roofers working up above. At the same time, we can have the stone masons working below safely. They're well protected, and that we can keep on our construction schedule. I should mention that we had a time limit as part of the contract. I don't remember exactly what it was.
When you say the contract, we should say it's the contract we had with Lama Foundation.
Yeah, with the Lama Foundation, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but a little further on, we began to realize that we weren't going to make it, and I'll explain why we had to ask for an extension, but some of it had to do with stonework. So this is one pivotal moment. I was standing on a mountain of dirt which had been excavated for the foundation, watching the 6 guys working putting this material on the underlayment on the roof, and the 4 masons working. And I knew we were almost out of money. I was thinking about laying the crew off. This was on a Tuesday. I was thinking about laying the whole crew off on Friday, because I knew we were going to be out of money, when I got a text from our extraordinary fundraiser, Waduda Welsh, who texted me and said we had just received, I don't remember, X amount of money, but it was enough that we could work for for many, many weeks in advance. And I looked up from my phone and noticed that the name of the underlayment was called Grace. And truly it was great, a moment of grace.
Ultra grace.
So just a, pardon me?
Ultra grace.
Ultra grace, yeah. Yeah, so just a comment or two here. So we know in the lifetime of the Dargah, we're hoping 300-400 years, the forest will be grown and very likely there'll be another fire. And so fire protection of the structure was uppermost in our mind, or at least a consideration. In fact, by the contract with Lama, they wanted wooden pillars. We were able to convince them that stone pillars would not only be aesthetically better, but helpful in terms of fire prevention of the structure. And then this underlayment is called high heat underlayment to resist any heat once the metal roof is on from ashes or embers that reside on the copper to prevent any further burning of the wood. So as the roofing material is going on, the masons are installing the wall panels and the benches. We made, actually they came up with this clever idea. That's an engine lift that was modified by having our welder make an extension on it and make it a little crane. The problem was that it was so lightweight that someone always had to ride on the backside. That's Neil Martinez, acting as a counterbalance as the stone benches being this portion of being placed in its placement. And these are the wonderful masons. That's Peter Hunt, head mason Bogano. Neil Martinez. Neil is a Native American. Lives at the Taos Pueblo, where his family's lived for many, many, many generations, and in fact probably worked for us the longest period in various phases. And Peter's father, John, and then David Kraut. Of course, this is the first wall panel that went up. And on the summer solstice that year, just by chance, someone yelled and said, "Look at the panel," and the light was shining through the newly finished zone right through the opening where the skylight is, and perfectly highlighted the heart and wing symbol. And I might mention that this symbol specifically was designed by Murshid Fatima Lasser. So now that the masons are working underneath, we could begin to put the copper roofing material on. And another person who was recommended to us by Mark Goldman, our contractor, was John Nettles, known around town as Copper John. He's actually quite a brilliant man. His former profession was as a mechanical engineer. John wanted to fabricate the pieces for the copper roofing material at his shop in Taos and bring them up in large amounts. We felt that would be inefficient, so we constructed a temporary metalworking shop right beside the Dargah. So we leveled out a spot, made a large table for him, put a protective canvas cover over him, brought up metal bending equipment. That green thing in the center is called a brake. We bought 2 brakes, an 8-foot brake and a 4-foot brake, and placed them there. I don't know how we got them up there. Ravi was his assistant, and as each piece was being fabricated, Ravi would bring them over, go up the ladder, and hand them to our roofers who were working on the roof.
And we had contacted many copper specialists trying to understand how to get or what patina to get after it would weather, and should we put this coat on it, that coat on it. And after consulting many people, the decision was finally made that we should just let the copper do its natural process, and whatever place it would go to, that's what we would be satisfied with.
Yeah, it was very clear in doing the research that it would be only temporary. We'd be doing a disservice by trying to, and an additional expense, would try to put a temporary covering on the copper. Here's John doing his fabrication work, Copper John. Well, Copper John's also a river guide. He didn't show up for work sometimes. I found out later he was guiding clients on the river. And this is the crew, Copper John on the left, Ravi Babcock again, and then our extraordinary contractor, Mark Goldman, in the center, but on to either side is Ollie Collingsworth and Ron Garcia, the two roofers. The system worked fantastic, except for when Copper John didn't show up and was guiding somebody on the Rio Grande. Otherwise, we worked continuously with a nice workflow. A little precarious, but everyone was worked safely. Almost finished with the Zome, and when that was finished, we stopped it for the next phase. We stopped the copper work, that is. So while the copper Zome was going on, all the wall panels have been put on, the benches, the upper portion of the back wall, the underlayment. This was rather expensive German manufacturer moisture barrier, so water wouldn't come up and loosen the stone floor tiles once they were grouted into place. You can also see in this photo the kind of disarray of the grave mound. So ground squirrels had kind of taken over sometime before the Dargah structure was started, and I counted 6 tunnels through the grave mound. So, well, as I said, the roof was going up. We brought up all our stonework, the remaining crates of 70 that from Taos. And one of the things, if you could go back for just a moment, one of the things we discovered was that there were 3 extra benches. We were constantly confused trying to figure out, well, the stone benches didn't figure out. We finally figured out there were 3 extra stone benches shown in the bottom left corner, and that there was 1 extra stair tread, which made no sense. But the other thing that we soon discovered was the floor tiles, in order to make a pattern, had a numerical, alphanumerical designation on the backside, and then a map was made. And so when we took the crates apart, we could, like a puzzle, reassemble on the dance circle the complete floor in its pattern. The problem was that the markings on the back of the tiles didn't always match the map. Worse, we discovered that the hand-worked tiles were slightly misshapen and not of an accurate size, which we'll see in the next following photos. So the next, the masons came up with the idea that literally every stone had to be recut to the perfect size. Otherwise, if we had placed them in the floor the way they had been cut, the pattern would have quickly become distorted because of the different sizes. So they were actually, every side of every stone was accurately cut, then placed in an 8 by 8 foot pattern on a platform that we had been built. And then we'll see in the next. So 2 guys were constantly cutting in, and this was part of our delay in our schedule, because this work actually took most of 2018. Excuse me, 2017. And so you could see the grinding was just a continuous effort. Then we had rented a very kind of an expensive forklift that we brought from Santa Fe, New Mexico, to the job site for various purposes. And it turned out it was the perfect thing to do, because it had a 42-foot reach, And so once a 8-foot by 8-foot section of floor tile was assembled, that was accurately fitted, the forklift would then pull into where the crane had previously been and then reach into the Dargah, and then we'll see from the next slide.
Right. And you can see here too that not only are the 8-pointed stars in the red sandstone, but so are now the 5-pointed stars. And that was an adjustment we made when we were in India.
And by the way, Eric points out that the 8 and 5 are very much a part of the Fibonacci concept and numerically part of that, and are reflected in this floor pattern. We'll talk about that a little bit later at the end. And so here we are, and we've got an 8-foot by 8-foot section completed. This is the very first one being laid. You can see how perfectly fitting each of the stones are. So by contract with Lama was not to supply any material support to the project, but also this was a drought period. So we had to haul our water for all of the stonework from Taos, 275 gallons at a time, and this had to be done often twice a week. And so this the masons worked out a schedule with the water as well as where to put their tools at the end of the workday. And one of the people that Mark Goldman introduced us to was a woman by the name of Kimberly Polis, an extraordinary artist from the Taos area. And we engaged her services because we came up with the idea of beautifying the 8-sided skylight, which was meant to replicate the skylight in the Lama Old Kitchen and the dome. But we thought there was a possibility of beautifying it with placing what's known as in the Southwest as punch through work. It's commonly done with tin. Here we're doing it with copper. So Kimberly was quite interested in doing the project. We engaged her services, and she submitted a number of designs to Shabda for his approval, and you'll see the results here shortly. This is the assembly of the skylight, which was made in Colorado Springs, nearby. It was brought partially disassembled, just the framework and the glass. But on a specific day, Jim Stunner was assigned to assembling it. Kimberly brought all of her copper punch-through panels, and Jim installed the glasswork and the copper panels to assemble the skylight. And to go on top was the lightning rod, of course. And so we came up with the idea of using the Fibonacci spiral as part of the design, and that's perfectly proportioned with the actual lightning rod. It has 2 places on the bottom which are concealed for the 2 conductors that are coming up from the 2 columns to be bolted on to make it a complete circuit. And then we also purposely placed it on the skylight, so when the skylight went in place, each of the Fibonacci spirals would point in one of the 4 cardinal directions in honor of the Native American religion. That's Julie Lake on the left. She's a master knife maker, jewelry maker, working principally with wire. She's also a incredible welder in terms of her ability to weld bronze, which became quite important. Jim Stoner's helping locate it, and because of her precision, it's perfectly placed on the skylight. Mark Goldman's overseeing the process. And so this is the completed assembly of the skylight. And to lift it again, I mentioned that Jim was an extraordinary, he's a professional rigger, and so it was his job to lift the skylight in place. We brought the crane back, but one of the things we realized was the skylight framework was too fragile to lift it alone. So we had to construct this wooden carriage system that the straps would be attached to and would actually lift the skylight up into place. It created a terrific problem though, because once we brought the skylight up there, how would we disassemble and take this wooden carriage apart? And we'll see that in the next slide. So what we came up with was because the skylight was slightly above the grave mound, we brought in some heavy timbers, built a platform over the top of the grave, centered underneath the skylight, then 3 tiers of scaffolding, and then 3 of the masons were assigned to go up and disassemble the carriage as we were placing the skylight. It was rather precarious. You can see that we've tied guy straps, 4 guy straps to stabilize it. And in the next picture, you'll see what it looks like when the skylight's being lifted. Now, the issue is we have 6 guys working plus a crane. It's rather expensive. It's also this work both underneath and on top was dangerous. And so we rehearsed the day before the crane came. Each crew that was assigned a work chore rehearsed their part. So the masons, the 3 masons, figured out how they were going to take apart the wooden carriage when it was brought up on top and how they were going to take it down through the skylight opening. Jim Stoner on the ladder on the left and John Hunt on the ladder of the right. Their ladders were wrapped in foam pillows that we bought at Walmart. Every pillow they had, $3 pillow, and taped those to the ladders. Then you could see the extreme angles that the ladders were had to go to in order to be effective. So the roofer lent us metal bracing work that was screwed to the roof to prevent the ladders from slipping off. And Ravi's job was to hand tools, and because once the skylight was in place, 4 screws were placed in each of the 8 sides, so the ladders had to be moved around. So his job was to inspect the safety guards, the metal safety guards, so for the ladders to make sure they were in place. And so we had rehearsed that part, and it went fairly smoothly. And this is the result. Next phase is to put the copper on the porch roof. And of course, then the masons had continued their work with the assembling the floor, and it doesn't look like it from this vantage point, from this photo, but they've carefully calculated how to connect each 8-foot panel with the requisite design pieces. So as the floor was being completed, we realized that the grave mound had to be rebuilt. And so Sadiq von Briesen, one of the original members of the Lama community, lived there for many years, highly respected member of the community, and also the person, one of the people who dug the grave in 1971, in February 1971, through the frozen ground, decided he wanted to be part of the grave rebuilding process. And in the middle is Ravi, and on the right is Kestrel Alexander, Kestrel being the Lama coordinator, and he too wanted to participate in this one particular day. So one of the things that we were quite conscious of was that visitors had left mementos on the grave. So all of those mementos were gathered as we took the grave on apart, and you'll see the bucket down on the left corner. And then as we rebuilt the grave, all of the mementos, virtually every single one, was carefully placed back into the grave. So we knew that as soon as the grave was mound was rebuilt, that the ground squirrels would attack it again. So to overcome that, we purchased a stainless steel 1/4-inch mesh screen and then cut it to fit. So we reshaped the mound with sand, placed the screen in, and then began the rebuilding process. So just like a structure, the grave mound has a structure too and kind of a foundation. The largest stones were placed first to hold the balance of the structure as it was assembled. And this is, so I might say that the final placement was done all by Mireeds, Sadiq, Ravi, and myself. I think it took us 2 or 3 days. Each stone was very carefully placed, and this is the finished work. So then we had a blessing ceremony after the grave mound had been completed. And this, I believe, is in 2017. And I think that was on August 26, 2017.
Yeah, what was so extraordinary to see is we had built the dance ground down below because there wasn't room enough to dance. But now with the Dargah construction, we had maybe we had 150 people on there, or I don't really know the actual number, but we had a lot of people dancing right there on the grave, on the Dargah ground, So that was very exciting to feel. And we had been concerned about that the grave mound was off center, I think Malik and I wanted to move it on center, but Lama didn't want us to move it, and we capitulated and said fine. And so it was off center, and what it created was a place for the musicians to stand. So when you had the grave off to the side and the musicians in the middle, then that created a beautiful center. And so somehow we learned a auspicious reason why that we hadn't seen ahead of time.
Yeah, somehow it always seemed to work. It was perfect for the musicians, and I noticed it was almost always perfect to hold the numbers of retreatants for the size of the Dargah. As we'd been criticized about the Dargah, though, it was not the Zome area alone wasn't any bigger than the old Lama kitchen. So much to my surprise, during the laying of the stone tile, floor tiles, David Kraut, one of the premier masons, had taken a large piece of scrap stone home, and at night
he's on our left.
He's on the left, and
on our left, yeah.
It had taken home a large piece and carved this, and then one afternoon, totally to my surprise, he and the head mason Bogano presented me with his handiwork, and so that's my memento for working on the Dargah. And if you don't think I love those guys, each person who walked, every single person, I felt a complete bond with. You'll feel their hearts as you visit. So as Shabda mentioned, to honor the ancient people, by the way, Anasazi is kind of in politically incorrect name, so you'll hear us reference the ancient Pueblo people or ancient people. In order to honor them, the original inhabitants of the land, we decided to do the foundation facades and some of the back wall panels with stonework that replicated their work in cliff dwellings and so on. And here, Neil Martinez, ironically, from the Taos Pueblo. And I might say historically, it's thought, as many may know, the ancient Pueblo people occupied many sites in the Southwest, but they disappeared in around the 13th century. And one of the places that it's thought where some of them migrated to was the Taos Pueblo. So this is a ancient Pueblo people site. There are many, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them in Utah New Mexico, Colorado, Arizona. And this is a site called Waputki in Arizona. You'll notice the stone coloration exactly the same as what we used. And you'll notice the detail and their beautiful work. And you'll see in the next slide the beautiful work, precise, concentrated placement of chipping and placing of each stone was carried out throughout. And frankly, because of the number of pieces and because of the working that each stone took to place it perfectly, this took almost the entirety of 2018, the facade work. And if you're a visitor or have visited the Dargah, you'll marvel at this work. You'll see it because its beauty is quite outstanding, quite noticeable. And Peter and his father John, Peter was on college break, chipping away. So we can go to the next slide. Neil, Kev, I had the feeling he loved this work, and this is kind of the finished result of the mason's work. You can see all of it. And then you can see here Jim Stoner and Julie Lake's final contribution to the Dargah project was manufacturing this bronze handrail. Again, we came up with the idea of using the Fibonacci spiral, the basis of the spiritual design of the Dargah that Eric used. So we have, again, a specific use of it for the termination of the handrails. And it's an exhibit of incredible workmanship by Jim and Julie as well. It looks simple, but that was extremely difficult to manufacture and then place correctly. But here you see all elements: the stone, the metal work, the copper roof. We have 4 roof drains or scuppers. They're called in the New Mexico tradition canales. So here we see the completed structure with all of the elements finished. Let's go back for just a second. So you'll see, I mentioned that we had discovered we had 3 extra stone benches, and one of them we won't see the placement of, but we found exactly where each extra piece should be placed, and one of those benches is placed right here at this foundation wall below at the edge of the landing here, and you'll see the reason why it was placed there in a minute. So we utilize the concept of Japanese rain chains for the scuppers, particularly so water wouldn't blow into the Dargah during storms. We also, under each of these rain chains, there's 4 of them, is a underground drain system. We made, these are dry stacked retaining walls here that uses soil between the stones rather than concrete, because we're hoping at some point that plants will grow out of there. So now you see the 2 back drains. And we can't quite make it out, but you can see a drain underneath here. And so each of the 4 drains is connected with an underground piping system that goes down the hill for about 250 feet to a collection tank. So we collect all of the roof water, and you'll see a rain chain here in use. They're quite spectacular when it rains. They're very beautiful. And you can see the storage tank down the hill. So we never, the water is now being used by llama, and it was meant actually for llama's use, but perhaps someday there'll be a solar powered pump to pump water up hills. We placed a small pipe in the same trench, so if there was ever a pumping system, water could be pumped up to the Dargah for gardening purposes. And below that, that wall I was just speaking of is Murshid Vera's memorial. And we've saw that the wooden benches that had been placed there originally were almost completely destroyed by the effects of weatherization. And so it was a perfectly logical thing to conclude, well, here's where the extra stone benches will go. So we placed the two that you see on either side of this photo, and down below is the bench that will be lifted up and placed at the wall. So there's kind of a visual connection with the memorial, with Murshid's memorial and the Murshid Sam's Dargah. And this is the niche in her memorial that contains her burial ashes. So the work concluded in 2018 with just the beginning of the building of the entry ramps. So this is early 2019. We'd finished on October 30th in 2018, and we began the work on May 9th, 2019. We were now into the period beyond our contract. We'd asked for a 6-month continuation, despite the fact that we had to stop the Dargah construction because of Scott's injury. Many rain and snowstorms. I kept a weather log. We were, in 2017, we were stopped 12 days in the first 3 months by weather storms. And then we, per our contract, when Lama requested that we not work during retreats they were hosting, we didn't work, but still we felt, rather than argue, we asked for an extension. The 6 months extension was to expire on July 30th of 2019, and here we are in May, finishing up our final work. So the final work was the entry ramps, and you can see that we lined either edge with a stone that we used in the dry stack walls at the drain system. You can also see where we came up with the use of the 2 extra pieces, as we made a formal entryway to the dance circle with the extra stair tread, and the entry landing to the ramp down below is where we used the extra edge piece that was sized for the entry landing at the Dargah. We used it at the beginning of the ramps. You can also see that we constructed an elevated walkway, circuitous walkway up the hill. The reason for that is that this hillside, it'll become clear in the next photos, water comes rushing down the mountain, and that becomes a quagmire. Again, here is the entry to the dance circle. You can see the entry to the ramp where we use the edge piece, and then a newly built entry into Murshid Vera's memorial. And this is down at the very bottom of the walkway that we constructed. Again, the reason being is you can see from the hillside, all of the water from rainstorms comes down to this area. It becomes a totally muddy quagmire. So we built this elevated walkway with a drain ditch on either side. And this is at the entry to that walkway. In the final rest place, we built placed 4 resting benches beginning from Lama Central, kind of equidistant for people to rest as they walk up the mountain, because we're at an elevation here at 8,700 feet. This is the final resting spot, and the stones that were left over for the edging of the ramps, miraculously, virtually every one of them was used to build a little retaining wall for this resting bench. You can see in the background also that we constructed, maybe you could go back, Shabda, one slide. So the Dargah has a bathroom facility, which I mentioned we had constructed. You can see it there in the background. There's also a storage facility for tools and so on. And so that kind of completes the ensemble of structures. This is our final crew on the left. Ravi working to the very last day. In the center is Steve Torres, our extraordinary equipment operator. It's because of his beautiful work that it's hard to understand, but the way that he sloped the land as we remediated is part of the reason we don't have erosion problem on much of the path. And then for the last 2 weeks, we had this gentleman on the right, Grant Weaver, who seemed like the perfect person to be working on this portion. A very sweet, gentle man, and it was kind of like the healing of the site as we worked our way downhill, remediating the construction road. And this is the remediated construction road. We brought in 20 yards of fill material that we used all the way up the mountain to reslope the bank where we had cut it for a road, leaving a flat area of 6 feet wide per contract. And Steve sloped it just perfectly so it drains continuously without eroding. And after the slope was constructed, we seeded it with seed recommended by Jai Cross, put on the erosion prevention cloth. And that was the final work, remediation work. The work was finished at 2:30, July 19th, 12 days before our time was to expire. But at 2:30, this is what it, on July 19th, this is what it looked like. So the sign that had burned, when I picked it up, it fell into 6 parts. We shipped it to the original carver, Bob Johnson, who did some recovery work on it, restoration work, and then reshipped it to Michael Cothrazzo and with his beautiful workmanship, restored it so beautifully, and then designed this metal framework that holds it at the entry. And so this is what we call the Pilgrim's Path, formerly construction road, now pathway up to the Dargah. On 28, when the project was finished in 2019, during the monsoons, the true drain areas that we had developed to drain this site almost took out the path that we had carefully taken. So the whole Lama community came together, and this is Kestrel Alexander again, working with the crew that lined the edge of the 2 drain channels and to protect the walking path to keep it in place. So it turns out to be a perfect complement to the entire construction process. And I internally felt like the path would be nice if it was lined, and here it turned out that it was, and for a very practical reason. So we'll see some different views of the Dargah during different phases of the year. This is a beautiful sunrise summer morning.
Right, and this is a picture early on because now the copper is still fresh. But if we were there today, it's a dark brown green. Just you can hardly tell it's copper.
Yeah, and so you can see the hillsides turning a little brown at first, sense that fall is coming and soon winter. Yes, it's just a view of the beautiful inside of the Dargah.
Right, and you can feel, if you're a regular visitor to the Lama Central, that same kind of 8-pointed star that you see there, and where the shadow of that or the travels around the inside of the dome, this mirrors that beautifully.
Snow starts to show up, as I said, often in September, so the seasons are changing. This is a grand view from inside the Dargah that's seen any time of the year.
Yeah, you can see the patina changing on the copper now.
There's one other comment about this photo. You notice on the left on the porch roof, there's a glass panel. That's a solar panel. And so we installed a solar lighting system inside the Zome. So at night it can be switched on, and for practices, visitors at night, the whole Zome is beautifully lighted up at the interior. And winter is now coming upon us.
You can see the raven is still looking on.
Yeah, it's full on winter now. Yeah. And now spring. This is what it looks like in full bloom in the springtime. Yeah, and so we wish to honor not just the people who worked on it, who's virtually everyone who worked on the project. His name is listed there under the project team, but you know, the Pir Shabda came up with this concept. The Sufi Ruhaniyat was willing to back it. Waduda and her fundraising helped, you know, did the payment of it. The trustees appointed a committee that carefully oversaw every phase of the work, the expenditure of the money, led by Kabir, Stuart McKinnon, Waduda Welsh, our wonderful fundraiser, Basira Beardsworth, doing an incredible job of bookkeeping and assistance. And Abraham Sussman, Azim Breeze, and Fazil Pay completed the trustees oversight committee. And from the deepest part of our hearts, we wish to thank all of the people who worked on it. I believe it was almost 70. It was between 60 and 70 people who worked on it. And then with great gratitude and humility, we express our deepest appreciation to the Lama Foundation circles in the Lama community. As it's noted, the Dargah was dedicated on August 26, 2017. It is used for retreats and visitors from pilgrims all over the world.
You know, an extraordinary thanks to all the financial contributors, and it's extraordinary.
650 people.
Yeah, 600. It's extraordinary that the Dargah was completely built by contributions made for the Dargah. We didn't dip into any fund for anything else or take money from any other project. Every dollar spent on the Dargah was donated by people for the Dargah. There's one last little part to this sharing about the Dargah that we wanted to skip over lightly, but have you see, and that is that our architect wrote an incredible article on what went into his heartfelt design of the Dargah, and we're just going to show it here, and then you'll find this on the Rouhaniyat website, the part that's dedicated to the Dargah. You'll find this article there if you really wanted to study it carefully. But I'll just kind of skip through it here. Yeah, he talks about how the same principles of music are the principles that go into a sacred architecture. They're based on the same geometry. And the Dargah was built with that sacred geometry in mind. This gives you some of the examples of there's the Fibonacci curve, and then it talks also about the fractions, the geometry of music, showing it in nature, showing it in different forms of architecture in different parts of the world. Talks about the Zome principle and where it comes from. Then how the proportions of things were made. You can see how the grand circle and the distances, they were all created based on the music of geometry. The floor, it's shown here, you can see the central picture is from the great courtyard at Fatehpur Sikri, where Selim, the great Selim Chishti, the Sufi saint, is buried. And that, my dear friends, is the story of the Dargah as best we can tell it. And we hope it's there for many, many years. Many people said to me, "Oh, it's so wonderful that you're building this to honor your teacher." And I said, "It's not really that. I want to give him a better place to teach from, a place where we could be comfortable." And we feel that one can go there, from our experience teaches us that one can go there and open one's heart, and that you can receive guidance. And so we wanted to create a beautiful atmosphere and protected place where you could spend a long time and find that guidance that you're looking for. And extraordinary gratitude to my dear brother on the screen, Khalif, Malik. What he did was a great gift for all of us. Thank you. I had no idea when you said, "Oh, do you need a project manager?" what that meant. And with so much dedication and so much strength and fortitude and longevity, and it will last long after both you and I are no longer in these physical frames. And thank you so very much, Malik. And so happy we have this opportunity to share with you, the viewer, just a little sense of the love and the dedication and the care that so many people brought to making this possible. So let's close with may all beings be well, may all beings be happy. Peace, peace, peace. Amen. Thank you so much.